Hey everyone, and welcome to today's Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled to guide you through this one because frankly, we're going on a totally mind-bending journey. We are going to look at the transition from the static, unchanging, perfectly symmetrical mathematics of the universe to the explosive, unpredictable reality of human history. We're talking about the fundamental nature of time, energy, and how reality actually happens.
But first, I want you to start by pondering a pretty provocative question. Think about this for a second. If the fundamental laws of physics are perfectly symmetrical and unchanging, which our best mathematical models tell us they are, then how on earth do we explain the explosive, chaotic, forward-marching history that you and I experience every single day? Like, how do we get from a frozen mathematical equation to the messy, living reality of the present moment?
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here is our 6-step agenda for today's Explainer. 1. The blueprint of energy. 2. The symmetrical block universe. 3. Shattering the static symmetry. 4. The factorial engine. 5. Unleashing awesome power. And 6. Kairos and the witness. Starting things off with Section 1, the blueprint of energy, and Einstein's equivalence principle.
Let's rewind back to Albert Einstein's miracle year, 1905. This is where a fundamentally new understanding of the universe's structure was born. You all recognize the famous formula, right? E equals mc squared. As our sources detail, this was an equivalence claim. Einstein basically showed that energy and mass are just two sides of the exact same coin. But look closely at the math here. It uses a constant multiplier, the speed of light squared. This is a brilliant, quantitative blueprint. It literally tells us exactly what amount of energy is trapped within a given mass. But what's absolutely crucial to understand here is that it's a static equivalence. It tells you what energy is, but it doesn't give you the structural causal logic of how that energy actually escapes or evolves over time. And you know, Einstein himself was deeply captivated by this structural perfection. He once said, "I am satisfied with the mystery of the eternity of life and with the awareness and a glimpse of the marvelous structure of the existing world." He believed the ultimate goal of the theorist was to find the mathematically simplest concepts, those foundational axioms from which the entire cosmos could be built. He was always searching for this underlying, unchanging structure to reality. Moving right along to Section 2, the symmetrical block universe, focusing on Noether's theorem and the illusion of time.
Now, what's really interesting here is that this search for an unchanging structure brings us to the mathematical problem of a perfectly symmetrical universe. And this is perfectly highlighted by the work of a brilliant young mathematician named Emmy Noether. Noether's theorem proved that for every symmetry in nature, there's a corresponding conservation law. So, most importantly for our explainer today, she proved that if the laws of physics do not change over time, meaning they have time translation symmetry, then energy must be perfectly conserved.
This strict mathematical symmetry leads straight into what physicists call the block universe, or the B theory of time. Think of it as the ultimate Einstein view of reality. It's a static, four-dimensional model where all moments in time just exist, tenselessly. In this view, past, present, and future, they're technically an illusion. Energy is just conserved, symmetry is perfectly maintained, and structurally speaking, nothing ever truly happens or changes. It is a frozen blueprint.
Which brings us to the tension in Section 3, shattering the static symmetry and the necessity of acceleration.
But wait a minute. You and I both know that things do happen, right? We experience time. So how in the world do we shatter this static symmetry? Well, the answer lies in information theory and curious principle. First off, sans change, there is no information, period. Second, asymmetry is what actually creates a phenomenon. If the universe were perfectly symmetrical and static, there couldn't be a lived present. So to get observable history, we need a fundamental shattering of that static block. We essentially need a foundational asymmetry, or an acceleration, to break the symmetry of uniform motion.
And incredibly enough, Einstein's own work laid the groundwork for this very shattering. You see, the equivalence principle, which ultimately led to general relativity, was born from his thought experiment about a man in a falling elevator. Einstein realized you simply couldn't tell the difference between being pulled by gravity and being accelerated through space. Our sources point out an amazing detail here. E equals mc squared is fundamentally an acceleration claim. It relies entirely on nonlinear transformations. Because acceleration is a break in uniform motion symmetry, the very nature of mass and energy inherently implies a foundational shift. It's an inherent asymmetry just waiting to be unleashed.
Let's get into Section 4, the factorial engine, introducing E equals a factorial.
This brings us to a radical new framework.
We're moving from the blueprint straight to the engine. On the one hand, E equals mc squared is the blueprint. It's a static equivalence that uses a constant multiplier to tell you exactly what energy is trapped in mass. But on the other hand, we introduce E equals a factorial. This is the engine of liberation. Instead of a constant multiplier, it uses a factorial to model a structural combinatorial explosion. It completely shifts our focus from a static, unchanging quantity to the actual causal logic of how evolution happens.
So, the crucial point is how this Chronos realization actually functions structurally step by step. Step 1, the A in our formula represents those foundational axioms, or that initial asymmetry and acceleration we just talked about. Step 2, the factorial symbol, the exclamation point, mathematically models the shattering of the static block universe. In math, a factorial calculates the sheer number of ways to arrange distinct elements. So, step 3, a simple linear shift in A creates a massive combinatorial explosion of causal history. And that is the E, standing for evolution or manifest energy. Like I said, it is literally an engine of liberation. Section 5, Unleashing Awesome Power, the Nuclear Manifestation. Now, if you're sitting there thinking, this sounds purely theoretical, let's ground it in some undeniable physical reality. Comparing these two frameworks highlights a massive shift in perspective. E equals mc squared focuses on the amount of inherent energy, using a constant multiplier to describe a static, tenseless potential. But E equals a factorial focuses on the causal logic of the phenomenon itself, using factorial growth to describe an exponential density of information. To put it simply, Einstein tells you how much energy exists in the prison of mass, while the Chronos realization tells you how it violently enters the world.
And this brilliantly illustrates the whole concept. Think about a nuclear bomb. Splitting an atom is a single, foundational, asymmetrical shift. It is the A. But what happens next isn't just some linear release. It is a structural evolution. It triggers a factorial chain reaction, generating a staggering web of complex outcomes and an absolute explosion of awesome power. A nuclear reaction is the literal physical shattering of the static block universe. The symmetry is broken, and manifest history is violently created. Finally, Section 6, Kairos and the Witness, Comprehending the Chaos. But here's the catch. An explosion of information is really just chaos without an observer. To understand how a mind processes this infinite avalanche of data, we have to define a concept called kairos. While chronos is the measurable, linear progression of time, kairos is defined here as the asymmetry of data compression. It's the exact point where witness, a human mind, recognizes a single significant whole from within the overwhelming factorial complexity of history. It's that sudden psychological awakening that happens when you find deep, profound harmony amidst all the noise.
Consider the massive contrast between these two states. On one side, we have Chronos. This is the massive factorial engine at work, the completely unrecoverable web of every possible historical state. Our sources use the centuries of unrecorded, everyday human activity that built civilization, or the long, tragic corridor of the Trail of Tears, as heavy examples of Chronos. But on the other side, we have Kairos. This is the compressed, singular now of recognition. Think of Helen Keller at the water pump, suddenly realizing that the symbols being traced into her hand actually represent the water flowing over them. She compressed the massive chaos of sensory data into a singular moment of profound meaning.
Let's move to our final philosophical point and see how this builds to a truly profound existential conclusion. As our sources state, the relationship with God is found in the transition from the factorial complexity of the power released to the singular recognition of its harmony. The sheer awesome power of the universe, the factorial explosion of E equals a factorial, is honestly just blind mechanics without a witness. True meaning requires someone to stand in the present, compress that chaos, and recognize the underlying harmony. Which leaves us with this final thought. You are a witness to the universe's explosive combinatorial history. You are living right now in the shattered symmetry, riding the wave of that factorial engine. So, what compressed harmony will you recognize in your own Kairos moment today? How will you pull meaning out of the chaos of time? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Until next time, keep looking for the harmony.